Welcome everyone to ConFABulous 2020. This is the panel titled LGBT Gaming Groups or all LGBT Gaming Groups. My name is John Till and I'm here with Don Kaiser, who's the ConFABulous Convention Chair. Hi, Don.
John?
So I wanted to have a panel on all LGBT gaming groups and explore a little bit what's it like to play with an all LGBT group or a mostly LGBT group, and how is that different from playing with a not so LGBT gaming group. And I have a few other topics we could address while we're here, such as what games are good for LGBT groups, and maybe that's all games. But let me ask you this first, Don, if that's okay. What was your first really LGBTQ experience in an RPG?
Well, that's easy, John. As you can tell from my background, I'm an old, obviously an old Techiemel fan. Techiemel, Empire of the Pale Throne, was the second, big role-playing game ever published after D&D, published in '76. And in Techiemel, being gay was not looked down on. It was accepted completely. In Techiemel, it says the only thing that's not tolerated is intolerance. And so my first true LGBT experience was my original Techiemel character was gay. He had a gay lover. So that was my first gay LGBT experience, and I've had that ever since. So that was it.
I think mine was in a live action role-playing event at the University of Rochester, and this would have been maybe 1991, 1992. The GM for this session, he was running kind of a combo of World of Darkness and Shadowrun. So it was set in the future in a Shadowrun type setting, but back then we ran a lot of games that were kind of a combo of the World of Darkness and cyberpunk stuff. And he opened up character generation, basically asking every person, like, what's your name and your sexual orientation, and then tell me what's your character's name and what's your character's sexual orientation. And then the next words out of his mouth were, what do you love? What do you hate? What would you kill for? What would you die for? And those were sort of, I guess, kind of improv acting cues. And based on that, we created our characters. And so I created this character who was kind of a scientist who lived in the Barrens and was gay. And it turned out like 4 to 6 hours of live action role play later, one of the other players revealed that he had been playing a closeted like mercenary the whole time. But that GM was somebody that I connected with. Like, sometimes conventions are good because you find people you want to game with in the future. And that was the case with this particular GM. So we GM together for years while we were in the same town, and we just kind of clicked. And I was a Techiemel fan from a pretty early age too. Unlike you, I didn't really get to play Techiemel until I moved to Minnesota. But the sort of Legions of the Everglorious, which was the supplement on military legions, had an LGBT military legion. Mm-hmm. And the source book for Techiemel, the sentence that you were quoting about the only thing that's not tolerated is intolerance itself is right from the source book. So that was kind of my first experience.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, when I played with the author, with Professor Barker, I played a straight character. Um, the Professor Barker was he was interesting to play with. He was Muslim, and as we know, Islam takes a pretty dim view of being gay. I'm going to leave it at that. But Professor Barker was able to really separate out really separate out his personal life from his life in Techumel. Playing with him and knowing him as I did for many, many years, he was kind of spooky in that he really lived Techumel. You would ask him a question about some ritual priest in some odd out of the way place, and he would just know this person. He would describe this person. He would say, who he was. What was he gay? Was he not gay? Did he have any wives? Did he have any kids? What was his hobbies? And it was just like kind of spooky that way. But in all the other games in Techumel I've played, I've always played a gay character. It's just, that's just the way it is. So getting specifically to the topic that John said here, the reason I have the map of Techumel behind me is that my gay group is, I won't say it's 100% gay, because I do have one straight person in the group who's very gay friendly and comes to support us at ConFABulous and Gay Lexicon, and is a dealer in our vendors room all the time, and a longtime friend and things like that. But everybody else is either gay or bi in my group. My one trans friend has dropped out, but yeah, it is, for me, I don't, because we're playing in the world of Techumel, it doesn't really affect us that much as far as, I do have, my group is in the next few weeks going to be having to get married, a number of them. Techumel is, Soliano is a very clan-based society. Clan is mother, the clan is father, and the clan matriarch says, well, it's time that you got married and had kids for the clan and things like that. And so I had a session a number of weeks ago where I sat them all down with the clan matriarch, and I asked them one by one, here are some questions for you. What kind of person are you looking for? Same sex, opposite sex, what, hobbies, everything like that. So, I've been busily making NPCs for them to meet. They're going to have a session very soon going forward about whatever. And to be fair, within the Soliani society, if you don't want to have kids, you can declare yourself gay, so you don't have to have kids. Still have to get married, because marriage is more of a thing of political than as much as anything else. So you want to have some advantages and things, but you may not have to have to have kids. And even if you have kids, you foist them off to the good clan girls in the clan house, and you leave.
But, so Techumel's a kind of game world that gives you a lot of room to live in if you're an LGBT person who's looking for a game world that's a good fit.
Yes, it is. It is. And people thinking about Dungeons and Dragons and some of the Dungeons and Dragons worlds and things like that. We were talking in the Ask a GM panel earlier. Dungeons and Dragons world, it is more of you can do a lot of role playing, but it really is not geared toward heavy role playing in a lot of ways. Did for a number of years. We stopped playing for a while now, but my Shadowrun character, I played Shadowrun for a couple of years. My Shadowrun character was gay. I was the I keep thinking the fixer. That's not the right word. But anyway, the person I had the ran the vehicles and things like that in Shadowrun, and I had a garage, a shop, and my husband and I ran the shop. So it's perfectly okay in Shadowrun again to also be gay. That's another world that lends itself to alternate sexualities. But I John, you may have other things, about D&D. It's hard. I know it's not impossible, but I suppose you have to have a certain DM, because it just isn't a lot of sex in D&D. It doesn't come up. It doesn't, What do you comments about that or?
Well, I don't really play D&D much at all anymore. However, I've run and I've played LGBT characters in D&D, and back in the 3.5 days here in the Twin Cities, I used to play with a GM who was openly LGBT, and so that was not a majority LGBT group, but it was usually a pretty LGBT friendly group. So it sexuality doesn't play a lot in the game world per se, even though at least in one of the settings, Coralon Lorethian, the elf deity, is pretty gender fluid as you can get as a deity. It doesn't seem like the deities there really affect the world. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like the religions there really structure society much. So I guess I haven't hit on the right D&D group. There were certainly settings that were spin-offs of D&D, like the Blue Rose setting, which were explicitly based on romantic fantasies written by people like Mercedes Lackey, that were very LGBT friendly settings. But to me, I think Tekkamel is certainly in that category. The friend that I used to play Shadowrun with quite a bit, and World of Darkness, he was African American and bi, and preferred Shadowrun to White Wolf because he felt like the setting was much less racially stereotyping and much less typecasting than the White Wolf games were, with their sort of clans and other kind of social categories that the monsters fell into that were often kind of, racially stereotyped as well. So he felt less locked in by Shadowrun. That being said, probably the biggest gaming circle I've been in where homosexuality was explored back in the 90s was like in the World of Darkness games. It was just ripe for it, with Anne Rice's vampire novels being a major inspiration for the World of Darkness games. There's your answer on D&D. Don't play it much. I'd prefer to play Tekkamel if given the choice, and I'd probably prefer to play an old school RPG based on white box D&D rather than 5e if I were to have a choice. That being said, I had a lot of fun gaming with 3.5 back in the day, and I've had some good times with 5e too.
What about your Star Trek group?
Well, my Star Trek group. So I am in one of the two gaming groups I'm in, plays Star Trek Adventures, which is the newest, most modern Star Trek RPG. That gaming group came out of ConFABulous 2 years ago. At ConFABulous 2 years ago, I ran a Star Trek Adventures RPG set. It was an original series adventure, and it was set on the USS Alan Turing. And it was an adventure that went into the Romulan neutral zone. And one of the players there I had played with for years and years. We're really long-term good friends. Another player is somebody I play with in a local Twin City science fiction role-playing group called Saturday Night Space Opera that does open gaming. Now we're doing it virtually, but typically we would do it at the Source or at Tower Games. And a couple people joined online as well. Lyda Morehouse was in that game. And ultimately, 3 of the players in that game and myself decided that we wanted to run an all-LGBT Star Trek game because everyone had a lot of fun in that game session. And so we did, and we've been running it for like more than a year and a half now. I think in December, that'll be like our 2nd year anniversary. And that one is also set on the USS Alan Turing, although it is a post-Dominion War game of exploration and intrigue and Shackleton Expanse, which is a region of space that was created as if you want an open area to explore, do it in this game. And so it's a starship that's got mostly LGBT characters. There's been poly relationships among the characters and NPCs. There's been a defection to the Romulans of one of the player characters. And then like the 2 other members of his polycule went and tried to rescue him, kind of tried to kidnap him back, which almost created a significant military encounter with the Romulans. That Boolean character decided to run off with his Romulan perfect erotic object, Romulan Marine lover. So it's been a lot of fun. Lyda's been writing fan fiction for the game. Another player's actually done watercolors because her character does watercolors. The player who plays the captain likes to do virtual interior designs of starships. So she's doing her own design work on various areas of the ship, and has done all these really nice character illustrations too. So it's just been a lot of fun.
Have you found, you said it's LGBT, have there been situations where, sex has come up or played an important role other than your player who ran off with his Romulan Marine?
Well, the captain came back from a really long adventure, like the first year and several months out in the Shackleton Expanse. We finally made it back to a star base. And then she went to find the Klingon dive on the star base and picked up a female captain. So these 2 women went to a holodeck and had a good time. So, and that was actually, like, that should not have surprised anyone because she's a Deltan and, they have a pretty mature attitude about sexuality. But it was really an entertaining surprise for the other players. I think the thing that's been different about it is that this is the role-playing game, I think, where we've had the most female non-player characters and supporting characters, as well as characters who are, genderqueer or not identifying as male or female necessarily. And species-wise, it's also a pretty heterogeneous crew. When we came back from this extended mission, the chief engineer decided that she wanted fewer humans on her crew and more aliens, hoping that they'll have a better survival rate than her human engineering staff did. So it's been kind of fun. I mean, I can, you know, it sort of brings me back to why we do an LGBT convention, right? Why do an LGBT convention? The world, on one level, a lot of things have changed. So LGBT people often feel like they have more space to participate in other conventions or in regular gaming groups that may be, you know, not LGBT identified. But there's something about coming together with your own people, or with people who you share a lot in common with around sexual orientation and gender identity that's really special.
Well, yeah, it wasn't this year, but I mean, a year ago, it was 2 years ago, I think, 3 years ago, I'm pretty sure, that I ran a chill adventure. I don't know if you remember, if you were playing that one, that took place in a gay bathhouse.
I was in that bathhouse, I remember.
That was a fun little adventure, you know. Yeah, that was, and it was, and again, it was just one of the standard adventures that the people who wrote the third edition of Chill had written, but it wasn't written, it wasn't stereotyped. It wasn't, there wasn't people pointing fingers or anything like that. The monster was just somebody preying on people in a gay bathhouse, and you had to figure out what was going on. So, I mean, you can do these things, my group is not, in addition to, GLBT, I have, most of my players are also women. They are GLBT women, but my one friend, Jeff, who Skypes in from California every week, he's playing a female character who's bi. So, I mean, you just never know. One of my players, Maria, is she's gay herself, but she's the only one playing a male character. And she's adventurous in how she does her sex. I ran, this adventure I'm going to run tonight called The Unveiling of Beauty. I ran that for my players a few weeks ago, and I was a little surprised that her character was really into whips and chains. So I was like, really? Okay, we'll do this then, shall we? And one of the things because it was interesting, because one of the things that they found, because Tekken, of course, has a lot of high tech, former stuff from the great ancients. So they found this sex chair that you sit in the chair and it, gives you sexual ecstasy, right? Things like that. And it was designed specifically for, or it was set, and it's broken, so it's only set for this, but for men and for gay men. And she really gets off on the chair a lot. So it's kind of fun. So you never know.
So did you ever run that scenario at a convention? And if so, was it different than how you ran it for your gaming group?
You mean the one I'm going to do tonight?
Yes.
Yeah,
Is this the first?
No, I ran it at Con of the North a couple of years ago. And yes, it was, interestingly, it was much more tame when I ran it at the Con of the North than my gaming group. My gaming group was much more adventurous.
Well, I think that's the nice thing when you're with a group that you trust, or with a convention that's, thematically drawing on a community that you feel like you're a member of. Sometimes you can take more risks as long as those are kind of structured so everyone feels safe. Mm-hmm. So that can be pretty fun. And yeah. So what other thoughts do you have about what are the possibilities with LGBT gaming groups, or mostly LGBT gaming groups?
Well, again, my other two groups that I'm running, I'm running a D&D group for my coworker and their kids, and another one for my nephews and my godnephews. And those two groups, they're interesting, but they both have, 12, 13, 14-year-olds in it. So, we're not going down that road in those groups right now. um, so yeah, my Wednesday group was the only other one. And like I say, that was a shadow. When we did the shadow run, I had a husband and we had a business, and there was whenever I came back from an adventure, I would just say, okay, you'll see me in a couple days.
There you go. ...
I mean.
So just a reminder to folks who may be watching on our YouTube channel, you can post comments and you can ask questions through the comments that we will see and respond to. So you'd be welcome to ask a question of us, or to share something about an adventure that you think is LGBT themed, or a gaming group experience that you like. I'll maybe plug a product that has not been published, but it's a fully realized scenario that's LGBT themed that a friend of mine, Rachel Cronick, wrote. She has a role-playing game called Blade and Crown, which is sort of her tribute to the early role-playing game Swordbearer and to Harn. So it's a fairly gritty medieval RPG, and I was one of the play testers for the role-playing game. The role-playing game Blade and Crown is published, but at Con of the North a few years ago, this was probably like 5 years ago, maybe 6, she ran an adventure called Mountain Monastery Murder, which is set on the world that she normally runs Blade and Crown in, which is called Cultaire. It's a pretty interesting world. And it was set in a monastery that is an all trans woman religious order. And so if you sort of each person in that religious community is pursuing a great work, and it's believed that if you complete your great work, you will actually have a transition to being biologically female. So that's something that the deity that these monks worship will grant if you've achieved your great work. So we were visiting members of this order, so we were basically all playing trans women. That was the player character role, and it was advertised as a mature player game. And I don't recall any sex whatsoever in the game. It was a murder mystery. We were there to investigate a murder in which one monk presumably murdered the other. But it was like one of the best role-playing experiences I've ever had. It was with local folks at Con of the North, and I think there may have been a trans player or two, but most of the people were cis men who were at the game table. And it was really, everyone really took the game really seriously and played it really well. It was a very immersive experience. It was great. I hope someday that Rachel will publish that scenario, but publishing something takes a lot of time and money, and that's, you always have to think about how many sales are you going to get. I recognize that it's not easy to publish, and you want to recover your funds, but that was a really rewarding gaming experience. It kind of showed me, wow, this is like what you can do even with like maybe a mostly straight group of players. You can really immerse yourself in an LGBT environment. It really depends on the social contract at the table, and if everyone really wants to play the game the way the person who wrote the scenario or created the world intended.
As John said, is there any questions, comments out there? John, you're muted, John. John, you're muted.
Huh.
There you go.
I think you should be able to hear me now. Sorry
Yes.
about that. So hopefully we're not SETI at home and there's no one out there, but people will eventually see this, even because it's going to be on our YouTube channel.
Mhm.
So I thought I'd recommend another RPG, and there are currently 8 people who are watching the session, so that's great. We're glad you're here. This is a very contemporary RPG. It was designed by a trans game designer, Avery Alder. Avery also designed like my favorite story game, which is called The Quiet Year, which is a game in which you're basically telling the story of a community in the last year of its existence before a disaster strikes it. It's a really fascinating game. And this RPG, Dream Askew, is about queer strife amid collapse. So it's basically a post-apocalyptic game about a queer community that is trying to survive in the midst of a psychic maelstrom. Now, what all of that means, the players find out together. The idea behind this particular game is that details of the setting and how the characters interact will just emerge from play. So it sort of follows the ethos of Powered by the Apocalypse, even though this particular game is diceless. And you are creating characters, and I'll give you a sense of what are the character classes, because I think it's pretty fascinating what Avery did here. So here we go. You create a community in this game too. It's called an enclave. So there's a character called the Iris, and this is a character who's unnerving and has been touched by the psychic maelstrom. So they're more of the psychically enabled character, perhaps. There's a character called a Hawker, who is an industrious individual, and their role is more material, social, and contingent. In other words, they're the person who hustles, who does odd jobs, who gets pulled in, is pulling a livelihood out of the rubble of the apocalypse. And then there's the Stitcher. This is a character that, you know, fixes things that are broken, handles problems when supplies runs out, or stitches up the wounded. So they're fixing, mending, repurposing, and they have a workshop. Then there's the Tiger, and their symbol is the, you know, combat boots. And this character is basically fierce, and they fight. And then there's the Torch, and this character is spiritual, social, and mystical, and it's even more sort of drawn into the ritual end of things. And
John, you cut out again.
that is strange. Sorry about that. So the game is called, again, Dream Askew. And one of the places you can buy this is from Indie Press Revolution, which is an online indie RPG store. So that's kind of one game that I'd recommend. And I've been kind of racking my brain to think about other really LGBT friendly RPGs that are out there. So if anybody has suggestions, oh, here's a question from Larry. Have you ever had two characters within the same party have relationships that were at odds with the orientations of the players themselves? And if so, how did that go and how did the players react? So I think what Larry is asking here is, for instance, have you had players who may be gay who are playing someone straight, or cis playing someone trans, or players whose characters are dating each other when the players are not dating each other? And so I'm sure I've had players who are playing a different sexual orientation than their own. I think that's a fairly rare thing for straight people to do in my experience, but it does happen from time to time. I've certainly seen a lot of guys play women or try to. Certainly seen women playing men. I've been in gaming groups where people were dating and maybe their characters were dating and romantically involved too. And this often becomes awkward. So I would rather have, I think I'd prefer to have two players whose characters were dating but were not, but the players weren't dating. And ideally not interested in each other. I don't know, boundaries get very complicated in role-playing games, but relationships can get quite messy when the relationship ends, particularly the real-world relationship. I mean, I've had gaming group, I've been pretty fortunate. I see horror stories about this all the time on things like, on places like RPG.net. I think I've been pretty fortunate, and maybe like, like I think that's always a temptation for a GM though too. If you're like highly attracted to someone, like does that start affecting how you GM towards them? And I just think that's something that people have to work through, and like you need to listen to your players. And I think, this comes up a lot in horror too, is what you're offering up, what the players really want. Being a GM means that it's more than just listening. It's more than just telling people how great your world is or how great your story is. You actually have to kind of go with what people want out of the experience of it too. What do you think, Don?
I've never been in a situation, that specific situation, so I really don't have a comment about it. I certainly have been in situations where, for one reason or another, a group blows up for personal, because of personal conflicts, but not necessarily personal conflicts that were relationship related. There might have been other issues that had come up, right, for whatever reason. And I've certainly been in those kinds of situations, but not personal relationships where things blew up out of the way, and I can't recall any groups where that I ran where players were two players were in a relationship as characters. So I've just not had that. I don't have anything to say about it because it's never happened to me. So
we may have touched on this a little bit. Have you ever run scenarios that were explicitly about what an LGBT person did that caused a problem for other people?
Well, no, I mean, indirectly, that one little chill adventure I ran was that way, but
Right.
but that's because the monster was, you know, taking over LGBT people and causing them to be bad. Um, but no, I've never had any situation like that where that's been the case. You know, I have had, long time groups where I played a long time in the 90s. I was in the 80s and 90s. I was in a group, Role Master group, and my character was pretty much mostly asexual. But there was just wasn't a lot. There was just wasn't relationships just really didn't come up in that group that much, and so it had I've not really had any situations either as a GM or as a player where sexual orientation was an issue one way or the other. Fortunately, again, I've been blessed. I know that there are people out there when it makes what's happening, and it's just like, really, and things go south very, very quickly. But it just maybe just with the people I've been playing with. I mean, I've been out for a very long time, and so most of my friends know who I am and what I do, and it's mostly friends that I game with. And even if I'm at a convention like Con of the North, I don't hide who I am, and so if people are bothered by it, then not my problem.
Yeah, I've certainly had, I remember one Con of the North, one session, there's a game I really enjoy running. The system's called Ubiquity, and there's a couple of Ubiquity games like Hollow Earth Expeditions and Leagues of Adventure and One for All Regime Diabolique, which is Three Musketeers. It's a Three Musketeers game with magic. And I kind of like the Three Musketeers, 30 Years War period. So I sat down to run this game. This was like many years ago. And, the players arrive, they're all dudes, and they immediately begin homophobic banter at the table.
Oh, God.
So I don't even remember exactly what I said at the beginning of the game, but it was, and, I mean, I know I wasn't the only LGBT person who was there either, but at the table, but the other person certainly wasn't out. At least that's my guess. So, but I think when I began the game, I said, well, hopefully we've gotten all of the sort of testosterone spilling or like male banter out of the way, and we can begin the game now. But yeah, that's a really awkward moment when something like that happens. And I've been out in gaming the whole time I've lived in the Twin Cities. I kind of sought out gaming groups that were kind of left-wing or progressive or LGBT friendly. Some of the people that I game with now are part of that original group that play tested Rachel's Blade and Crown and Heirs to the Lost World, which is another 17th century Caribbean RPG that I helped play test and edited. And, I think I've been pretty lucky in terms of who I've gamed with. But I really value being able to participate in conventions like this one, because what I found as I've gotten older is that the LGBT community just means a lot to me. And for instance, I've participated in science fiction book groups in the Twin Cities, but the reading group that the North Country Galaxians hosts every month Our book club is a great book club. We read books that have LGBT themes, and that's important to do. I think I'm at a stage in life where, there's been stages in my life where I wanted to do things that basically engage the community at large, if you will. And then times when I was doing work that was more focused on the LGBT community, and I see a value in both. But I really feel at home in that reading group. I really enjoy ConFABulous, and for that matter, I like being at Con of the North too. Sorry,
one of the things that I mentioned this in my last panel, and I'm not going to go into details, but one of the probably the most craziest fun evening I ever had in all my role-playing career, and it's been 43, 44 years, 45 years, something like that, was very, very sexual. It was again, Techumel thing. Those who know Techumel, the deities exist. They are in people's everyday lives. One of the deities is Lady Dlamelish. She's the deity of pleasure, not just sexual pleasure, but all pleasures, but sexual a lot. And this was a game where the group I was with, we were spies for one country, and we were looking in on the temple of the Lady Dlamelish, and one of our players was this woman who was this funny character, but she played this. She was in real life. She was this big biker lady, right? Big and straight, as far as I could tell. But big macho. As a woman, you think about it. I hate to use the word dyke, but I mean, if you had to, right? That's for a straight person, but just she got in a situation where she was going to try to seduce the high priestess of the goddess of pleasure, and so the GM was in very rare form that night, and so she gets into the boudoir of the high priestess, and she's on the couch, like the Roman couches, right? And there are two couches kind of side by side, right? And the high priestess walks in, and she starts getting kind of flustered. The player character starts getting kind of flustered, and she says, I make a nice comment about her clothing, and the GM says, she's not wearing any. She's just wearing some silver jewelry and some nice jade dust, and she lays down next to you, and this high priestess had a habit of buying twins, slave little boys and girl twins. And so she had them come in and start peeling grapes and start licking their feet, right? And it kept getting more and more steamy as these catamites were licking the inside of the thighs, right, and kind of moving up, and the player character is like, she's like, where are they now? And it got very, very, very steamy, and it was a lot of fun just to watch her reaction. But so yeah, you can do sexual situations, detailed sexual situations, and still have it can happen. So
yeah, I tend to stay away from that, or to draw a curtain.
That is the best way to do it. Yes, you draw a curtain. Yep. Yeah. Like I said, when I came back from Shadowrun, they said, we'll see you in 3 days, and that was enough.
So any final thoughts on the topic of LGBTQ gaming groups?
Do you, yeah, any questions about, you know, John mentioned the social contract at the table. You know, about, do you I mean, John, it sounds like from what you've said, you know, you haven't really found very much difference. I mean, then your other gaming groups, you know, as far as, you know, I haven't, you know, I mean, it's just, I have this group and it's just, this is the way it's kind of grown and worked out. But, you know, it's just.
I think I would say that the all LGBT gaming group I'm in is different. We've really made a commitment to creating the kind of world that we'd like to be in Star Trek. And you know, we had an earlier panel that it might be worth people who missed that panel, the panel on queer Star Trek. A really interesting conversation about where Star Trek did not really stay in tune with the times. Like, you know, LGBT representation was really, really, really far behind in Star Trek and not all that well executed. And, you know, Discovery has certainly made some strides, but even there were things in Discovery that were very off-putting. So I do think it, you know, when you don't have to censor your own production, you know, because you don't have an external audience to offend, you can create characters who feel authentic. You can build community around the diversity that the Star Trek universe should have, and really explore the ways that human beings and aliens can be together a little bit more freely. So I think there are some real differences in that gaming experience from other gaming experiences I have, and that's not to put down my other regular gaming group, but I do really value the opportunity to participate in gaming with an all LGBT group too.
That's good to hear, John. That's good to hear. Yeah.
And Larry's asking, have you ever had a player use role-playing to come out of the closet?
Wow.
That's a
good one.
That's a good one. I'm trying to think if anyone, you know, I think I can think of somebody in recent public gaming that I've done who's kind of a recurrent participant who sometimes has explored, well, sometimes played a trans character in a way that made me wonder if this person is exploring their own gender identity. So I think, yeah. And, you know, that's a big responsibility as a GM, especially in a public setting, when you have somebody who's like thinking about their own identity, exploring it, and you just never know. Like you know, you worry a lot somebody's going to make a snide comment or a put down, and that, you know, you have to be very careful to like structure the experience in a way that's going to feel respectful for that player and kind of maintain that level of regard and respect. So I think that has happened. You know, the other thing I would say is that it's probably happened to everyone who is GM'd. It's just whether the person has told you that they were working through their LGBT identity. So it might not even always look like sexuality that they're exploring. It might be some other kind of difference that they're exploring. Some people do just like playing the one character who's an alien, or the one character who is belonging to this particular other group or group that gets othered. But sometimes people are playing those roles because they're really exploring, they're trying to model what would it mean to be the person I really want to be. You know, how will I navigate that difference or coming out? So I think probably more people have have had the experience of GMing for someone who was working through the issues, but maybe that person wasn't always explicit that that's what they were doing.
Not necessarily specifically to answer your question about using role playing to come out, but I did have a player, a friend, longtime friend, recently, well, a year or so ago now, but relatively recent to me, announce to me that she was transitioning to female transitioning, starting a female tradition, and the first she told us about it was at my gaming group. So it wasn't like she used gaming to come out, right? But she let me know personally at my gaming group that this was happening, and that's why I learned about it for the first time. So, so I don't know if that's not exactly the same as using gaming to come out, but it's where I found out about it was from in my gaming group. So,
and that makes sense because she must have really
felt
trusted and
felt
comfortable. Yeah. And I will say that like that was like half of the people that I played White Wolf games with in the 90s too. It's like we were all kind of in various stages of coming out at various points, and that I think, you know, in spite of what I was saying earlier about the typecasting that goes on and sort of how White Wolf character classes are configured, I think that was really a game that had a really strong sense of the closet in terms of the masquerade, that, you know, where vampires have to conceal their identity and follow these rules, that was really conducive to people exploring their sexuality and coming out.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left, John. Any final comments?
Well, Don, thank you for being part of this panel. And for those who haven't decided on a role-playing game yet at the convention, Don is going to be running one at 8 o'clock. So there's still a chance to get in to the TechML game, a narrow chance, but you know, let Don know in the chat if you really want to play in his game tonight. If you have not played TechML before, well, this will be one hell of an experience.
Well, thank you all for listening to us, and thank you, John, for suggesting the panel and agreeing to invite me to it. So,
okay, have a good one, everyone, and we'll see you at the game table.